It's the Task Management and Time Blocking Podcast, episode 24. So, you're a creative person, and getting into the flow state is the key to your success. Like Michelangelo or Leonardo, you use focused, high energy times to do your best work, and you love when you're in that state. But you also have a TikTok account. And guess what? The people that you're following on TikTok, they are a growing distraction. You just can't help yourself. You just your hand just drifts over to the TikTok account, and next thing you know, you're taking a peek, and then another peek. And when someone forcibly takes away your smartphone, like your spouse or a friend says, "No, you need to do your work," and they hide your smartphone from you. Finally, you're able to focus. But then you overfocus, and then you work for 15 hours straight, and then you collapse in exhaustion. You did the work. At that point, you look at your computer and your laptop and you hate the idea of even coming anywhere close to it to do anything further because you just overworked. So, getting and staying in the flow state and exiting it is not so easy after all. Tune into this episode to hear from me and my special guest, Manlio Lo Giudice, as we solve this challenging problem together. Welcome. And welcome back. And as you can see, I'm joined on the stage by our special guest, Manlio Lo Giudice. And before I introduce him properly and have him join the conversation, let me that we use for this program, just in case you're a listener and you're listening to the podcast or you're watching the video, and you've never joined us before, because we do things a little bit differently. So this is a problem-solving episode where we're going to look at a particular problem, the one I introduced at the beginning of the show, all about the flow state. And the first part of the show is all about diagnosing the problem. The reason that we're doing that is not just for the fun of it. We're looking for new kinds of solutions that we can introduce in the second part. So let's start with a story. Michael is an artist. He's actually an oil painter, and he's working on a big corporate account. He has one client, and the person is very demanding, but now he's building a surprise following on TikTok. He went from 100 to 100,000 followers in just a month, and now he can't get his mind away from it. Before TikTok, he used to work 12 hours a day, but as he's gotten older, so a while ago he used to work 12 hours a day, and now he's gotten older, he can't do all-nighters the way he could to get himself out of trouble at the last minute. Doesn't have the stamina that he used to have. With no one in his immediate circle to help, he thinks he's in trouble, but he doesn't know where to start. A little bit of background: Michael had a drug problem many years ago, and actually this feels a little, kind of similar. There's a certain loss of control that he's experiencing all over again. On top of that, Michael, he used to work construction to make ends meet while he was more of a struggling artist. He used to have a physically demanding job, but he's now a couch potato. And here to discuss the case of Michael and the problem of getting into the flow state, being effective while you're there, is Manlio Lo Giudice. And Manlio is from, well, you'll tell us where you're from, Manlio. People will figure it out from your accent, but he's a pragmatic engineer open to self-experimentation. He's also an entrepreneur, blogger, personal trainer, productivity and human potential development coach. He's also a newbie TV show writer, an amateur actor, singer, and musician. He's a creator of the ThinkFit app at ThinkFit.app. Manlio, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Francis, for having me here. Very excited. I'm from Italy. My origins are from Sicily.
Aha. Hence our use of Leonardo and Michelangelo. These are your bona fide peeps, aren't they?
Yeah. All right.
You're currently living in Switzerland?
In Luxembourg.
Luxembourg.
Yeah,
I
yes,
apologize.
which is a little bit lost in between Europe somewhere.
It's somewhere kind of in the top mid somewhere there.
Correct.
So let's talk about Michael's problem. So he used to be able to get into the flow state, and then he's a victim of TikTok, which is a fantastic app in terms of its results, that people who use it have a hard time getting out of it. And I've used, I'm a TikTok user. Are you also afflicted by TikTok, or have you stayed away?
I stayed away for the time being.
You're a very smart fellow, because I can tell you, and many can tell you, that that thing is like crack in terms of its addictive properties. It figures out exactly what gets your attention, and then feeds you a steady diet of all kinds of everything that just keeps you glued to it. This is worse than anything I've ever used before. It is so strong. And
it's engineered for that specific purpose.
It's specifically designed to get that done.
Yeah.
And here we are. We come along with our little flow state ideas, and our flow state ideas were first birthed by Mihalyi, Csikszentmialyi, with his book on the idea. But he captured on paper the idea that we get our best work done when we're not interrupted, and we are able to match the challenge of the task very closely with our capabilities or skills. So there's a nice balance between the two, so that it's not too easy and it's also not too hard thing that we're trying to do. So it captivates all our attention. And when we're in those moments, we're experiencing periods of euphoria, where we feel fulfilled, we have a sense of purpose, because this is why we're here on the earth, is to do our very best work. And in the flow state, we are able to do our very best work. It calls it forth from us. So that's an old idea. That's 1990, late 1990s. Been around forever, but the state of the art is still kind of that book. And along comes TikTok. And we want to get our best work done. And the world is engineering itself to prevent us from getting it done. So that's an accurate statement of the problem.
Yes, correct. And one point that is specific to this point, to this conversation, is that in flow state, time is flowing naturally. You don't realize that time is flowing. That this is one point that we will manage during this conversation.
Right. So, and if you don't, it's one of the other things I didn't mention about the flow state, which is one of the great bits about it, is that when you're in it, time flies.
Yeah, correct.
Right. It's the whole idea is that you stop paying attention to the clock, because you're giving 100% of your attention to whatever it is that you're working on. So time just kind of flies by, and that's the whole idea. The whole idea is that you're so deeply into it, you're so immersed in it, that you don't want to be interrupted, and you don't want to stop to look at the clock. You just want to keep going. And as you keep going, it gets better and better. And it's just an awesome space to be in. We're not taught it, so we're kind of self-taught. So we started teaching ourselves these things, depending on when you heard about the concept for the first time. But it came around in the early 90s. And pretty much, as I said, we haven't really done a lot of engineering. We've done some. In the case of Michael, I mentioned that he started off not being able to get into the flow state, and then he got into the flow state, and then he went too long. So he kept going and going and going. And have you ever had this experience where you keep going and going and going, and you go too long?
Yes. Yeah, I continue sometime, because reaching flow is a goal, is an achievement, is as you mentioned, is a self fulfilling, is endorphins, it's dopamine, is a lot of chemicals inside. So of course you want to stay in that moment, but then you are either interrupted, or like a few days ago it happened to me. I was interrupted by a shoulder pain, actually, because of my position. I'm posture at the desk. So I was so
back pain. Yes, I know.
Exactly. I was in the flow state, in the same position, not moving so much, just typing, and then this happened. So I realized where I am now. So this was one interruption, but healthy one. So
I know exactly what you mean, but it's not healthy, right? Because
Yeah,
Ultimately, if you have to stop because your back is hurting, obviously you should have gotten up to walk around. That's what I tell myself. I should have
correct.
stopped to get up to walk around. And really, when we go into the flow state, we would love to have an imaginary guide who just taps us on the shoulder and tells us what to do. Okay, now's the time. Take away your phone. Let me take your phone away. No more interaction with interruptions from social media.
Yeah,
And I'll stop you after an hour so you can get something to eat, something to drink, and you can change your position. You can go for a walk outside for 5 minutes, and that'll help you to keep going. So we want an imaginary manager to make sure that we don't, make a mess of this thing. Because we're left to ourselves, we're very likely to want to be in the flow state, but then experience, a kind of, for me anyway, it's a kind of a frustration when I'm not able to do my best work. It feels as if something is missing. And I look at the quality of what I'm doing, and if it's broken up by distractions and interruptions, I can look at it at the end and say this wasn't very good. I gave 5 minutes here and 10 minutes there, and the research says it takes 20 minutes to get into the flow state to do your best work.
exactly.
So if you don't get there, you can expect not to do your best work. But again, we're not taught these things. So we're, whether we know it or not, we're always fighting the interruptions. We're fighting the tendency to go too long. We're actually in a fight because the flow state doesn't come easily and without conscious effort. We've got to put an investment into it. So if there's a villain in all this, it's kind of our inability to manage ourselves in the flow state effectively. Is that accurate?
Yes, perfect, correct. Because also is a cultural matter. So we are by the society, we need to work. So having a break, voluntary break, as you mentioned, having someone tapping and said, okay, just take a rest, breathe, walk outside, just some
Mhm.
physical movements, some breathing session, mindfulness. Eventually, we say a lot of people look at this like, okay, I'm losing my time here. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a matter of energy management. People, they need to switch to some sort of energy management, because when we have energy, we are able to produce more flow, more focus, and during the day. Yeah.
Right. So it's managing posture as well. As you said, it's managing your food intake, it's managing water or liquid, because you can't stay in the flow state. And people do it. I've heard of people working for 48 hours straight, particularly creatives who give themselves over to the flow state, and then 2 days later they realize they haven't had a bite to eat, and then they collapse. But that's not ultimately sustainable, and it's not just with a little bit of the magic that we're hoping to explore in this episode. They will be able to have days of flow state as opposed to the one major sacrificial commitment that then extracts so much from them that they're unable to continue. So there's got to be a way, right? There,
Yeah.
there ought to be a way to not just get into the flow state the one time, but to manage ourselves in the flow state on a continuous basis. And also to look into the future and say, we need to be able to engineer our flow state so that when a new app comes along or your situation changes, for example, you might have kids. Let's say all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but let's say you get news that you're going to have twins. And the twins, it's great to have twins. And then they keep you up at night, and then they're crying, and then they're playing around. And then for the first how many years, if you're someone who works from home, getting into the flow state requires very deliberate engineering. You cannot just, it won't come to you the way it did when you were single. It needs
Exactly.
to be completely, it's a strategy. It needs to be implemented, right? So there ought to be a way to be strategic about doing your best work so that you can produce the results you want. Even if the technology comes into play, even if your family situation changes, whether you're working from home or working from the office, there ought to be a way. It's kind of like it really does. It's kind of up to us because the world isn't giving this to us. the world is kind of designed to not give it to us. So today, if we could frame this as a kind of epic struggle of trying to do great work, but at the same time, you've got to live, trying to do your best work, but at the same time, you've got to pay the bills. Creating amazing works of art, but at the same time, you've got to eat and drink water. How does that sound to you so far as a sort of a description of the problem?
Yep. In the same time, you have your life to live. You have a passion. You have hobbies. You have family, friends, dogs, cats, whatever. Yep.
And they all need to be fed, and they all need to move ahead, and they all need to stay alive, right?
Yep. Each
right.
one is asking for attention, and is asking for also our body is asking for attention when we want food or eat or drink, and time. Yeah.
Right. So if we weren't able to begin to solve the problem today, what would happen in the future? If we couldn't achieve the flow state in an effective way, what's that like in someone's life?
Okay. Well, as the difference between what shallow work with deep work, eventually. So again, not being able to reach a flow state like but training means that we are always in shallow waters. We are just not able to produce what is called deep work, but have something superficial. Like this is still work, but it's maybe not the important one we would like to achieve to reach our main goals, align with our purpose, because deep work is the one we want, the one we reach. When we do flow states, we are most probably working on something that is driven by our passion. So yeah, I think this is a struggle.
I agree. And it ultimately is really frustrating, because the poor output leaves us feeling ineffective. When we don't really solve problems properly, then they reoccur. If you want to put together a great information product, or you want to design a great app, for example, if you never do the necessary, important, high quality work that sort of is at the heart of the thing, then you could expect to be, churning your wheels in the future, because you never really get to something that's compelling and something that has, in the case of an app, something that has market value, something that really solves the user's needs. It stays superficial. It has these kind of awful qualities, the things that we don't want. And I think when people realize they're in a rut like that, often what they try to do is to work harder or longer.
Exactly.
And why doesn't that work?
Yeah, because as I mentioned earlier, it's about energy management. We are drained every time that we try to refocus, and with time we have inner frustration, because if in shallow work the amount of errors we are willing to make is increasing, because let's imagine we are focusing on one task. It could be anything. Then we are interrupted. We go back to the same task, and then we are interrupted and go back to the same task again. So, and our brain need to recap where were we at this moment, what is the next step. So we are not going into again the deep work, and we are not able to be creative and inventive as not be interrupted. So I think this is what exactly we are not able to solve some key problems that is also in history. In history, we had a lot of big problems solved during flow state or deep work. So with shallow work, unfortunately, we have maybe at the end of the day we have a lot of things done, but things are
we're busy.
Just low level, shallow work, things not bringing them the real milestone, not reaching the milestone we would like to achieve. And this is frustrating at the end of the day. Maybe we have done a lot of stuff, but it's not really meaningful to us. And this is increasing frustration. So this is the risk: being drained, a lot of energy, trying to do this interruption and work, shallow work, and then this feeling at the end of the day of a not accomplishment.
Right. The truth is, we're not quite machines. We have real relationships. We have things we have to get done for ourselves and for other people who are around us. We can't quite just program ourselves. But for the most part, we're operating without any information about interruptions. So it's not like we're getting into the flow state and there's a report that says you spent 15 minutes in the flow state out of the last hour. We don't have any data. We just kind of bounce around from one activity to the next without really knowing how much time and how well we're managing the flow state. This is kind of crazy, right? This is the most important time. We should be able to measure it. And we should, when it doesn't work or when it gets interrupted, we should be able to measure that too. Right. But I don't, and this is probably why we're still back in 1995 or whenever the book came out. So we're not even able to engineer the basics about the flow state. TikTok, however, is watching everything we do down to the microsecond, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They are like keenly, and they know exactly what to do. So we don't know what to do in terms of managing ourselves. We don't have any data about the best work that we do. But this app has all this information about how to interrupt us. So it's obvious why we're not winning this particular battle. It's because we have no information. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, exactly. It does remind me when a lot of most productive people, they are doing in the morning, do not look at your phone because or your email, because you are external inputs managing your time. Instead, you should manage your time, should be able to decide what to do next, how to plan your day. And this is basically the same here. And so going back to your last question, but it could be repeat.
We should get a report each day.
Yeah, exactly. No,
you try to spend 2 hours in the flow state. You only got 10 minutes. And the reason you got 10 minutes was because you had 5 interruptions. Yeah. I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, this does require,
I've never thought anything like that. Actually,
this does require work.
This requires a bell moment.
Ding.
I'm gonna put the bell in after.
Oh, you have a bell. Yeah, basically.
I don't actually have it online.
Okay. No, there are different tools. Again, this does require effort, which is required because nothing comes for total free, and this requires some, but it's very minor effort. This could be done also with a piece of paper with the interruption log. This is some it can be done. So any time someone gets interrupted, just log the feeling. I would feel what was the interruption, and then you need time to review. You need to digest and review what you wrote down at the end of the day, at the end of the week. And then there are different approaches to that. Only after that you are able to understand the main trends among the interruption types, times of the day. So that there are some common trends, commonalities. Each one is anyway personal, so is an equal one. So you have your own specific. And also another good point is the environment, of course, is a huge influencer in that. So the environment, if you do this work in the same environment, same every day, you will have a trends and some result. But as soon as you change your environment, you mentioned the twins is also a change in your environment, external environment. But you also, if you today you work from your office, tomorrow you move into a library or coffee shop, you will have different type of interruptions, and because the environment has changed. So we need to track those trends in a more very efficient and effective way. So yes, piece of paper is just starting, no cost at all, but again, this does require some reflection, personal reflection.
So it seems crazy to me, right? Because we're, here we are with our piece of paper, and we're tracking, we're here writing stuff down, tracking whether we're in the flow state or not, and what the interruptions are, right? Mm-hmm. Basic technology. So nothing has changed since 1995, because somebody could have thought of that when Csikszentmialyi came out with this book. TikTok, however, is getting better and better every day at figuring out how to get us from the flow state, from whatever it is what we're doing. So it's gathering data and it's improving. And here we are, scratching our own with bits of paper. The thing that's most important to us, which is doing great work. Here's the technology we're using. And we haven't made any tangible progress since the book Flow came out. We're still at starting. I don't have an app that measures the flow state. I don't have an app that measures interruptions. My devices aren't talking to each other. So if they did, they would be able to say, "Oh, you took a TikTok, you shouldn't have."
Yeah. Okay. I think the interaction. Maybe the interaction will come. There are some neurofeedback apps, but I tried many neurofeedback apps connected with some things connected to your scalp. Yes, measuring the brain waves. Yes, I have done a series of experiments, but again, I cannot stay in the office, for instance, with these things in my head. It looks a little bit weird. Yeah. So I tried, and then I tried also to. My app is also based on this concept of the logging interruption type is also the next update will introduce the interruptions interruption management module, which is basically logging the type of interruption and the time. It's a little bit easier for the user instead of writing. It's basically still an effort, but you have everything stored in the cloud, and you are able then to gather data and aggregate, and you finally have a picture of a weekly, monthly interruption types and trends. So this is a good monitoring tool, but still does require some work. It's facilitating, but
it's not fully automated. It won't be fully automated, and AI and device independent and platforms, all of them talking to each other, because it's the ecosystem that's the problem. It's not one, because I could be talking with you here and over here I'm getting interrupted by what's going on the phone. So the two need to be in at least communicating with each other, so that when it picks up that I've left my laptop and the keys stop moving and the mouse stops, that it knows that, oh, look, he's on TikTok on his phone. Mm-hmm. And it records all of that. This isn't high technology, but why do you think it is that the social media apps have made huge progress in the last 20 years? But since 1995 or whenever Csikszentmialyi did his book, we've made no progress. Why is there so much progress on the one side, the social media, and no progress on the human side, which is what we really want? The most important thing we want. Why has there been no progress? What's your sense of the reason why?
Oh, okay. I think there are many contributors. A social contributor, the cultural contributor. So it means the huge amount of users of social TikTok or whatever, or Facebook, or whatever, compared to the one willing to do deep work, willing to reach a flow state, understanding what flow state is on the first instance, understanding of their own personal capabilities and potential. I think the percentage is getting lower and lower. And for this reason, where you have a limited amount of users and testers and willing to pay or any sorts of income, also the investment is moving toward what is more profitable, and this is a flying wheel. So because social media are gathering, so having users, a user with data is is used to improve and a very, very, very fast way compared to the original flow concept and tools that have been already made. Also, my app is willing to do something, but I need really a huge amount of data to improve and to do the same.
Yeah. So I hear you saying that there's not been an investment in the productivity tools in the right way. I can also see that the science hasn't been quite there. Like they've the interruptive sciences, the social media sciences, the social graph, all of the brand new thinking that goes into social media has made jumps and leaps and bounds. There's been a huge investment in that, and there's been nowhere near that level of investment. Here we are, in us doing our best work in terms of being productive. It's like the science has been ignored. I hear you saying that there's not been an investment. There's cultural problems of what's worth investing in, what's not. I think we've also talked about, you and I, the chronotypes that people bring to the party. They're not understood. So we think that work should look a particular way, like you should work between certain hours. It should be done in the office. And if it doesn't happen there, then it's not. There are many bosses who believe that your best work needs to happen between 9 to 5 at the office, nowhere else on a weekday, and nowhere else, and nothing else that you do outside of that counts, which many of us now know is nonsense. Right? Or best work can easily come from a weekend because on weekends I spend weekends to get into the flow state. I can't do it the same way I can't do 3 or 4 hours of flow state on a weekday.
Yep.
This is
too many same here.
Same for you, huh?
Yeah, but maybe for the listener as well. So maybe you look you are working over the weekends, but again, besides there are different people and different. Okay, and if I am my entrepreneur freelancer, I own my job anyway. But reaching flow states again, we go back. You mentioned flow states during a weekend. It's enjoying. It's really self-fulfilling. It's a good thing. It's not like he's working on to produce a report in Excel or whatever in numbers over Sunday night or Saturday night, writing numbers because of someone told to do so before Sunday morning. So again, the drive is different, and reaching the flow state is self-fulfilling.
Right. I feel the same way. Although, someone looking on might say, "You're working on just like you say, you're working on the weekend." The kind of work I do for the weekend, I tend to do longer creative projects. I find really fun. It's a whole lot of fun. The fact that I like to do that, and I'm an entrepreneur like you are, should be taken into account by some app that helps me to organize my time. I mean, it should be able to, and I've seen people talk about this, I've never actually seen it done, but they should be able to get a sense using machine learning that I prefer to, because I have a track record of doing these things on Saturdays. I work in a particular mode. I do particular things. So when I use an auto scheduler called SchedPal. So ultimately, SchedPal should be able to read my schedules and say, well, you kind of prefer to do these things. So let me suggest that you spend Saturday doing this thing. I found this creative project, which involves creating some video, and you can create it then. It's not routine stuff. It's creative. It's fun. So I suggest that you do that over the weekend as opposed to working on some routine activity like balancing your books, which that requires a flow state as well, unfortunately.
You see, to reduce errors.
But that's not fun.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is missing is gamification. That we're very weak at self-gamifying, which is why we fall into the games that others create for us. So TikTok is highly gamified, right? They put everything into it in the kitchen sink in terms of gamified principles and design logic and philosophy. They ram it in there, right? Which is why it's so juicy. But here we are, pencil and paper. We're like,
I mean,
I keep track of it on a piece of paper. We're like,
same here.
Is that the state of the art for doing your best work? Is to scratch things on a piece of paper, because we're very weak at gamifying ourselves. So I'm not suggesting that somebody needs to do it for us, but if we know that, for example, getting 10 hours of flow state time for the week is transformative, then okay, well, let's make a game of it. Make a game of tracking that you get those hours. And at the end of the week, when you do a report or whatever, or a review, you say, how did I do? Did I get my 10 hours in, or did I? Simple game. Don't take any investment. You can still use pencil and paper. But it's as if we haven't caught up. We're watching the the Facebooks and the TikToks and the Instagrams, and we're like, whoa. And then we log in and we're like, whoa.
When I mentioned that engineering design, they are acting on immediate rewards and chemicals, which is very hard to transpose into the flow concept. So because if you notice, the time ago, not so long ago, also Gmail in the phone. So to refresh your Gmail main page, you need to scroll down like this, and you have the rolling wheel, and you are there like, who is going to write me now you checked 30 seconds ago, because earlier, because it's a sort of waiting this reward, like the same as a slot machine. It's the same thing. So you do something and you are waiting for something. Dopamine levels are increasing. The concept of TikTok, the concept is perfectly designed based on this model. So you don't know what's next, and the things that is coming next is giving this little bit of dopamine, this little bit of satisfaction. So in order for you to scroll again and again, and this is addicting. Is indeed addicting.
Right. It almost calls on us to be better engineers of ourselves, because if we don't do it, then we'll always be failing to reach our potential. Because if someone else creates a better, more dopamine-filled experience for you, and they keep using data to make it better and better, and they're always way ahead of where you are in terms of doing what you think and is the most important, then you're always trying to play catch up and you're always losing, basically. So we need a kind of internal, not just knowledge, but an internal ability to engineer ourselves or activities, so that at the very least we minimize the effect of TikTok and other kind of juicy interruptions, and we maximize. So at least we're in the game of rebalancing the power of our own intentions to do great work versus the others. And we're also putting in, the type of reminders on the other end, that if we over invest in the flow state and we go 15 hours straight, and then we hate even looking at the laptop after that we're able to manage the execution of it on both sides effectively. So we need a way to engineer ourselves.
As I told earlier, is energy management. We have a total amount that, like they were talking about, willpower is a limited resource. Willpower is depleting during the day. It's the same concept. Is energy is driving willpower. There is another study linking willpower with the sugar intake. Like to increase willpower, you take something sweet. And so again, energy management. If we are not balancing the energy during the day, you can start like it depends on chronotype, of course. This is a link to the previous topic of the chronotype. You may have energy in the morning, and then in the afternoon you are completely off, vice versa, or the opposite. And but again, alternating and studies are actually, when I post on Twitter many studies linked to the effect of the physical movement and mindfulness and relax breaks during the day on productivity, on focus, on so it sounds like I mentioned earlier, it sounds you're losing time taking 5 minutes of breathing, of mindfulness, but it's synergic. There are studies that when you go back, you are ready to take new challenges more effectively. So there are different studies. Moving is more physical because you move, so you activate some neuronal pathways that are different. If you breathe, you just relax your mind, and maybe after 5 minutes of break, like mindfulness session, you go back to work and you have the eureka moment because you are just disconnected. Like is like the shower. I don't know if I think you are aware of the shower moment. So the best ideas are coming when you are shower. Okay, you know that I got one waterproof post-it for the shower. They sell even that one, and I got one. It's in the shower. It's waterproof. You have a pencil. You don't have a pen. It's made for that, because if you have an idea, something, I need to do this, and then you can write. And so that's why also the app I develop is based on that, alternating period of focus, flow state with physical movement, physical breaks, and mindfulness sessions for the mind to recover.
That makes great sense, because we're talking about a kind of mindfulness that's not like being in a meditative state. It's like a meta level, second order mindfulness, which is how you manage your opportunities to be mindful. That when you're interrupting the flow state and you're going to use TikTok, at that moment, you're not being mindful. So the question is, how can you manage your mindfulness at this second level, at this meta level, so that you're less likely to interrupt the flow state to go use TikTok? How can you arrange your schedule? How can you arrange your interruptions? How can you use an app like the one that you're designing? How can you use the app to manage your mindfulness throughout the day? So it's we like I said, we talk about mindfulness in terms of being mindful in the moment and being aware in the moment, and that's great. But what we're talking about is, okay, how do I engineer my environment at this second level so that mindfulness is more likely? And unmindfulness, is that a word? Non-mindfulness is less likely. So how do I manage my environment? And I think part of this has to be software, because software is a part of the problem. The interruptions, some of them are coming through software. And we can't, with our paper and pencil, we just can't manage data. We can't collect data on paper and pencil, enough data to really effectively move the needle. So we have to use, it strikes me, we have to use an app. We don't really have a choice here. Otherwise, you're left kind of empty-handed trying to change this meta level. Is that one of the sort of motivations for your app? I'm wondering.
What I'm trying to do with the app is, okay, we all know that movement is good for our health. We may know that mindfulness is okay. We have a gadget like this that they are vibrating every hour because I need to do an X amount of steps every hours. The problem is, this is a perfect example. This thing is vibrating when it feels so, but if I'm doing something
like it,
because it's every hour, so every hour, I don't know when the algorithm is then it's vibrating, and I have to stop anyway. I have to look, okay, just walk. I'm doing something else, I just mute, and then I do what. So it's the integration, as you mentioned. We need to use software well integrated with less impact, negative impact on what we are doing as a core activity. That's why the app I develop is basically a productivity app on the first instance, and then is trying to integrate the physical movements, healthy habits, and mindfulness into the day with the giving back something, because you need to always give something back to the user. So maybe coaching the user how to reach a flow state for a longer period of time, because not everyone from one day to the other is just able to sit and focus for 30, 45, 50 minutes straight. So starting slowly, collecting data from the user, inviting the user to stop and then have a good and healthy energy management, and just following and bringing the user to healthier habits. So inviting the user, okay, you do this break now, then you go back to work, and then if you're able to focus, your focus will improve, and the interruptions you log, well, I give you something, you give you some tips, I need some suggestion how to remove those interruptions over time. And this is what I'm trying to do, actually. So it's also giving back something to the user.
Yeah, well, I think the users would love it to have, some feedback and data on how well I'm doing and opportunities for improvement that right now we just don't have. And we need to take a leaf out of the book of the TikToks of the world, which are they're using data effectively, and they're using new ideas and new principles, new technologies, and they're combining them all to squeeze out that extra 5 seconds from us. And we're not armed with anything as effective, paper and pencil and a decent memory and a couple of anecdotes, and that's what most of us are using. So it strikes me that the only way we can engineer ourselves is to have the data and to have the technology support that would in turn, if it doesn't manage the other technologies. So back in episode 11 and 13, I talked about 13, I talked about interruptive technologies like alarms. But yours won't necessarily be an interruptive technology. Yours will be a data gathering and suggesting changes to make. So that you're using the data that it's gathering and then suggesting that you make changes in the following way based on the data that it's being collected. So we're far better off to have, and this has to be the future. How can it be that we're going to be dropping out of the flow state just because there's some fancy something out there that's caught our attention? Is that our future? Are we really doomed to that? I kind of think so. I have to think that the tables are going to turn, and that we're going to be able to use apps like yours to really improve our capabilities. I think if there's a second bell, and we're ringing on a bell, and it's that we have to use an app. That's what would supercharge our behavior changing. We can't do this just based on a pencil and paper only. That'll take us only to like maybe the very first level of improvement. But to get past that level, we need assistance. It's just that we need the assistance that's geared towards helping us, not distracting us.
Exactly. Use the technology the good way. I mean, the positive
Good
way. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, Manlio Lo Giudice. Giudice.
Judish. Yeah, okay, it's fine.
I got it right. I want to thank you for coming on the show. How can people find out some more about your app?
Well, thanks to you, Francis, for this interesting call. And well, my website is www.ThinkFit.app, and we are on social media, Twitter mainly, and also Instagram and Facebook page. But on Twitter, you will find a lot of scientific research related to sedentary behavior and mindfulness and the effect on productivity. So this is a good point.
Right. I really want our listeners to kind of get the notion here that this is not about a single app that you download and then use. We're really talking about the movement here. You may call it a counter interruption, counter TikTok movement. You may call it whatever you want, but it's an empowering of us and what we want. We're observing that the social media companies are extremely empowered to do what they want. They have a lot to say. They have a huge budget. They have scientists. They have data. They have a huge advantage, and they're using every scrap of that advantage to move ahead.
Yep.
Just witness the growth of TikTok and how it's changed over the last few years and how fast it's changed and how quickly it's become addictive to so many billions of people. And we're just trying to claw back some advantage for us and doing our best work and doing it consistently and getting what we want in life and fulfilling our intentions. So I would call this, it's more than a single technology. This is a movement that Manlio is leading and heading up. And I can only hope that I'm around long enough to see the tables turned, because it's an extreme situation right now.
Yep.
And I've got to think that it's got to change and turn, and something's got to happen in our lifetime. So I'm hopeful.
Thanks.
Thanks again, Manlio. This is Francis Wade, and stay tuned. Let me tell you a little bit more about the other offerings that we have here at the task management and time blocking podcast. And also, I want to tell you a little bit about our next episode. So keep listening. Thinking of attending the next Task Management and Time Blocking Virtual Summit? Here's a 25% instant saving on your purchase of any ticket or content package. Simply visit timeblockingsummit.info/subscribe-to-podcast. And here's a clip from our next episode. You want to be on top. You want to be free of any feelings of overwhelm, free of a backlog, but there seems to be no way out. You ask yourself, have I created a problem for myself by writing down all my unfinished tasks? Does it make sense to save my unread emails? Why can't I just get rid of them all and pretend as if they never even happened? You wonder, maybe if I were a superstar in this area, I would never fall behind on the job of emptying my inboxes and to-do lists. But question is that even possible now or in the future? And if you want to leave a comment about this episode or any aspect of the work that we're doing here at the Task Management and Time Blocking Podcast, you can go over to www.replytofrancis.info and send me either a message by text or send me a voice message, a voice note. And as you probably know, we have a couple of places that you can interact with other people, talk about this episode. One is at the community, mightytaskers.scheduleu.org, and you'll see the link in the show notes. And the other, of course, is our upcoming Task Management and Time Blocking Summit coming up in March. Two outstanding opportunities to interact with other people about the ideas that you've heard on this podcast or any of our episodes that are coming up. And if you'd like to support the work we're doing, I invite you to click on the Patreon link below to make a donation. And please don't forget to like our show and recommend it to others on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, or whatever podcast app or service you're using. This is Francis Wade. I'm signing out. I hope to see you on a future episode. And until then, take care and all the best. See you later.